In episode 17 of the How to Get on Reality TV podcast, we're going to answer the question, should you build your character around a stereotypical role? We're going to answer that question and tell you exactly whether or not you should or shouldn't do that and the dangers of it, all in this episode coming up. Welcome to the How to Get on Reality TV podcast with Dan Giesling, where I answer your reality TV casting questions once a week. Welcome back to the 17th episode of the How to Get on Reality TV podcast. Super excited to be here today because we have a very good question from Sean. But before we get into Sean's question, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. The show's been going well. It's good to get your guys' feedback, and I'm hoping that this show and this podcast on a weekly basis is helping you get fired up to apply for reality TV. It's getting you motivated to apply for that show you've always wanted to be on. But most importantly, what I hope it does is I hope that it prepares you in a way that you weren't prepared before, and it gives you some information to give yourself a little bit of a leg up on the competition for the people that don't listen to or watch this show on YouTube. Before we jump into today's question, I do want to remind you guys that this show is driven entirely by you, meaning the questions we get are going to get answered, and so the better questions you ask, the more different questions you ask, the better the show is going to be and the more you're going to get out of it. So if you do have a question about the casting process, about your story, anything related to casting on a reality TV show, you can go ahead and ask that question. Submit your voicemail question at howtogetonrealitytv.net/ask. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump into Sean's casting question.
Hey Dan, first and foremost, thanks for having me on the show. I have a two-part question for you today. The first part is, should you play into a character that is generally used each season to each season on a reality TV show? For example, on Big Brother and Survivor, you almost always have a nerd casted, whether it's Ian Terry or John Cochran. It's just really consistent to the show. So my question was, should you play and fulfill this character that's consistent to the show, or would this really doom your chances from the beginning? My second question is, if I hold multiple Guinness World Records, would a cocky student be a good character to play into, even if I'm not really a cocky person? It's kind of exaggerating the truth, but I feel like I could pull it off since I can always go back to the Guinness World Records to really prove that I'm a cocky person. Thanks in advance. Love your casting tips. Keep up the good work.
All right, so Sean has a two-parter for us. The first part of his question, he wants to know, should you play into a character? So should you play into the stereotypical nerd role, someone like a John Cochran in Survivor? Should you play into, the typical teacher role? Whatever role that you see time and time again, you see for a reason on these shows, because the reason why these roles are created or why people are forced or put into roles is because they're relatable. So you remember, oh yeah, that was the cop who won, or oh yes, that was the nurse who, got into a fight, whatever. But so you have a way to relate these pretty much everyday people, for the most part, into a role that you already associate with. So that's kind of the point of casting and really how the show's edited and really fed to you or designed for you. So the real question is, do you want to play that card, or do you want to play into that role during the casting process? Now here's the thing I want to get into. If you get a chance to talk to someone like that is one of those nerd roles, so for me, talking to John Cochran or Ian Terry, that nerd role, let's take that nerd role for example. They actually are nerds in real life, and I mean that in the most highest praise possible. They talked about nerdy things. They were on a different intellectual level, and they weren't faking that. That's who they were. Now, I don't know about John Cochran's casting process, but I know that Ian played that up, and he was smart to do that, but he didn't play himself up as this athletic jock or this, ladies' man, because that wasn't him. And so the answer to this question is no, you can't. Don't play into a role that you don't necessarily fit into. Now, the reason why is you can't fake a character. It's not easy to do, and it's not effective. And the casting people, things have evolved, since the early days of casting. They can smell people that are over the top or that are trying way too hard and aren't being genuine. So the one thing that I would say to be aware of is don't force yourself into a stereotypical role, but be aware of where you think you fall into a role. So If you may be that nerd, okay, play it up, but maybe you're trying too hard to force yourself into a role. The best thing you can do if you're like, okay, Dan, what's the straight answer? Don't deem yourself what you think you are going to be in casting that drastically, because casting may see you in a totally different light. And the most important thing you can do when you get to the point in casting and you're like, okay, I haven't set myself up for it to be pigeonholed into a role, the way you find out what role they want you to play is by the questions they ask. And so if they continue to ask you questions about a specific area of your life, maybe how you grew up in high school, or maybe how, your role in student council, or maybe how the fact you're a blue collar worker, or how the fact that, you don't get mesh well with authority, they're going to ask you that same line of questioning in different ways, and that's going to help you understand the role you're being put in on the fly. It's not easy to do, especially the first time you're going through casting, but being hyper sensitive to the questions that are being asked to you. Really, all casting does is they ask you questions to steer you in the way that they perceive you. And so they're really telling you, hey, here's how you get on the show, but a lot of people will overtalk that or will go totally over their heads, and that's completely understandable because going through the casting process is very, very weird. It's not normal. You have to talk about yourself. So there's a lot of things, and it's uncomfortable. So for the everyday tryhards or normal people like us. So that's why I always tell people you got to practice, you got to go through it, because you're only going to get better at it over time, and don't quit on that. Now, so to take this one step further, instead of playing into a typical role, make yourself stand out a little bit different. So say, for example, you're a police officer and you go in and you play this rough and tumble role, and maybe you play it a little more harder than you should, but all of a sudden, what if you're the police officer who has a green thumb, who loves to garden? But maybe, if in your head you're like, well, I'm supposed to be a police officer, I'm supposed to be tough, so I didn't really want to talk about my gardening or something that you typically or stereotypically wouldn't match up with a police officer. And, one of the things I do want to say when we're talking about these different character roles, it is going to be stereotypical because that's how people are portrayed on reality TV until they show their colors otherwise. So, so instead of hiding those things that may mesh or break from a character, you want to share those because that makes you stand out. That makes you more than just a police officer, or more than just a nerd, or more than just, the pretty girl or good-looking guy on the block. And that's what I would encourage you to do, is build your character that way. So yeah, you may fit into a role, but don't play it that hard. Just be yourself. And I hate that saying, but be yourself and don't force yourself into something you're not, because that's the worst thing you can do. The second part of Sean's question is he wants to know, should he play the role of the cocky student? And he answered his question right away. He said, I'm really not that cocky in my real life. So don't be cocky in your audition video. Don't be something that you're not. So what you should do, I know we're talking about a specific instance, but you mentioned that you're a Guinness World Record holder. Right there, I don't know how many people are that have that, or that have accomplished that. So all of a sudden, there's half your casting story. What is the record? Why did you want to do it? How did you do it? When you got it, what did you do after that? How did you tell people? Are you proud of this? Are you ashamed of this? How hard, there's so much you could talk about just that instance, and that's exactly what we're talking about. So you may be a student, but you may be a student who's obsessed with obtaining Guinness World Records. I don't know. But use that. That's immediately way more interesting than just being a cocky student. And I had to pull myself back here. I got so fired up because, and I don't want to sound preachy, but like, this is just, you're sitting on a gold mine. And instead of digging on the gold mine known as the Guinness Book of World Records or your world record, you're talking about something totally unrelated. You're digging for gold in the Mojave Desert. So just work on your work about talking about the Guinness Book of World Records. Make that story compelling. Talk about your motivations. And that's going to give you a great basis to get your foot in the door to maybe get to a semifinals or get a callback. But one of the things, I do want to thank Sean for asking this question. This kind of poses a different type of question for the show moving forward. I think it's good to ask specific questions. If you guys do want to ask specific questions about your individual video or your character, I would say definitely do that. So if you want to ask, a question that's going to help a lot of people, because really that's what the show is about, helping as many people as possible. So if you want to ask a question that you know that you have that's on a broad level, and if you want to get deeper and say, here's my personal example, I'd love to continue to help you guys on this sort of a basis as well, because I think whether or not you have a Guinness world record or not, I think that point was driven home about what's unique about you, and hopefully that you dig for gold and the areas that are so unique about yourself and not try to be something you're not. So, Sean, I want to thank you so much for your question. We will be sending you a free digital copy of my story, How a Normal Guy Got Cast on Reality TV. Thank you so much for asking your question. I hope it helps, and keep us updated on your success. So as we wrap things up here on the 17th episode of the podcast, I do want to remind you guys that any of the show notes, anything we've talked about, my scanned notes from this conversation, from this podcast, are all on the website at howtogetonrealitytv.net/episode 17. And also for some added, advantage or some added value for you, if you go to the show notes at howtogetonrealitytv.net/episode 17, I'm going to break down 3 random people from this year's Survivor cast and kind of break down how they broke the stereotypical mold based on the information that's been shared so far on their bio. So to kind of take this question one level deeper, I figured that'll help you guys out, and I hope you guys get some value from that. We are going to change up how we do the reviews here, because I do want to thank people that have left for reviews, but it got kind of awkward reading the reviews. It's kind of like patting yourself on the back, which is weird. So what I want to do during the iTunes review section, I just want to acknowledge the people that took the time out to leave a review on iTunes, because I really appreciate that. It helps out the show. So I want to thank Dreg Scott and Blake the Steak for taking their time out of their day to go to howtogetonrealitytv.net/iTunes to leave a review. And if you've been enjoying the show, the new format, and been listening for the past couple weeks, I'd really appreciate if you took the time to leave a review. And as always, if you want, and there's another change too, if we're going to be sending out a casting news email every 2 weeks with our top 3 casting calls. So if you want to sign up for that, and if you want to use those casting calls to practice, or maybe you didn't know a show that you wanted to be on is casting, you can go ahead and sign up for that list at howtogetonrealitytv.net/calls. So that being said, I think this was a good episode. It was a great question from Sean. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys again, or we'll talk to you guys again, depending on how you listen to the show, next Monday. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.